Welcome to Responsible Business Conversations. This is a space for courageous leaders who are purpose-driven, leaders who believe in values-driven leadership. Today, we're in conversation with a leader who calls herself the Global Standards Advocate, which she'll tell us more about a bit later. Because today, we are having a conversation about sustainability reporting. We will be having this conversation with Lebogang Senne, a chartered accountant SA with nearly 20 years of experience in standard setting, regulations, stakeholder engagement, and governance. She has worked with a number of different organizations, but part of those organizations include the IFRS Foundation and the Pan-African Federation of Accountants to advance the adoption and contextualization of international reporting and ethics standards across Africa. Lebo, welcome to Responsible Business Conversations. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you so much for having me, Namhla.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure and an honor to have you here today as I look forward to our conversation. However, let's start off by getting to know you a little bit more. So tell us about this global standards advocate. Who is she, and what does this global standards advocacy entail?
Well, so Lebogang is, like you said, a chartered accountant, but also a mother. I think that's an important kind of part of my identity. Look, I was one of those the people that went through the typical 8-year journey. Mine was an 8-year journey to becoming a CASA. And then I got to the end of my 3rd year of articles, and lo and behold, I had no idea what I needed to do, what I was going to do with my life, because suddenly the very, very clear path had ended, right? And it was like, where do you go? Where do you go? And so it took me a couple of attempts to try and like find myself, find my where my career path would ultimately lead. I think the one thing that I realized in hindsight when I look back to my journey is that before I had the language to say I was looking for purpose-driven work, my heart was searching for something different. I tried the banking sector, it didn't work out. I went back into audit after I failed at banking, or maybe not failed, but learned that it wasn't for me. And even then, I just couldn't quite find that thing. But I think also deep down, I love knowledge, right? I love research. I love reading. I grew up a reader. And so standards kind of became the fit for me, where I could spend time understanding the why behind what we do, the why behind kind of the tier counts. And so I kind of ended up now in the standard space, initially just technical accounting. And then I found the Pan African Federation of Accountants, which is an NPO. And I discovered that, hey, I'm also a Pan-Africanist. I just have this love for Africa. And I knew that I had to do work that had some level of meaning or impact. And at the time, when I started at PAFA specifically, as the technical director at the time, the thinking was, here's a role where I can combine the skills that I've learned with kind of trying to have an impact, to create impact for Africa. And then we get to Global. Global is the activist in me. We'll talk a little bit more about standards as the conversation progresses, but the one thing about kind of having spent time in standard setting, responding to comment letters from the various standard setters, is also realizing how little of an influence most of the time the African voice comes through. And I say little of an influence, not from me saying that the standard setters aren't paying attention, but because we are not showing up to the conversation. And I really, really believe that we have a voice, right? If you look at the adoption of the accounting standards, for example, Africa, a lot of African countries, in fact, the majority of African countries have adopted IFRS accounting standards, but very few of them actually provide commentary when it's an opportunity to comment. And then you get people saying, oh, but why are these standards being set and we are told to do X? And I'm like, actually, you have an opportunity to be a part of this conversation. So please come to the party. So absolutely global, because I absolutely believe in the value of a common language, but let's make sure that we're owning it and localizing it. So that's the global.
So you represent Africa in important sustainability reporting conversations. So you spoke about reporting as a whole, but now let's just around sustainability. So since you represent Africa in these different conversations globally, while also serving governance roles locally, what about these roles continues to motivate and anchor you in this work?
I should say represented. I mean, yes,
Mm-hmm.
my work is still very much in Africa, but I've kind of, moved off a little bit on
Okay.
the more, what do you call it, the more visible representation. But having
Okay.
said that, honestly, especially with kind of having traveled Africa quite a fair bit, I look around and I'm like, we are such a resource. It's such a cliche, but we really are such a resource rich continent, yet all the time there is so much suffering. I mean, I'm a village girl, actually. Let's actually keep it local, right? Home for me is a village in the Northwest. And every time I go home, I see the lack of development. I see the poverty. And I'm just like, there is so much potential on this continent if we get the basics right. And the governance, if we get the governance right, how much more can we have an impact in just ensuring that the taxes that are collected are being used for the right reasons, right? If we are paying attention to the S, and we're making sure that our children are educated, we have access to healthcare, how much better of a citizenship would this continent have? That's really what drives me. It's kind of looking at or wanting to just see better for our people.
It goes back to that whole element around contextualizing these standards in such a way that they work for Africa. So we said we're going to talk about sustainability reporting, but let's take a bit of a step back. What is sustainability reporting? Because the concept of sustainability reporting is not new. So how does this one currently differ from more traditional financial and governance reporting that organizations are already familiar with? And we've been hearing about ESG and climate change risks. And how does all of that now fit into this sustainability reporting that we're talking about?
Look, I think, we need to start thinking about sustainability reporting as a source of information or source of insight, right? Granted, we've had this move for ESG for a long time, especially in South Africa. But I think right now what we're talking about is bringing the companies to start thinking around sustainability reporting as a way to communicate information about risks and opportunities. Now, there's obviously a debate around what is an impact versus financial materiality. That's a technical conversation, but ultimately, for me, the core concept is reporting in such a manner that an organization is a lot more aware of the fact that it does not exist in a vacuum. There is various factors that influences its ability to create value, but also its impact on society, on the environment. How does it differ from financial reporting? Financial reporting, as we know it, is more historical looking. What has our performance been? What is our current position? Sustainability says, how will this impact our future performance? How will it impact our future financial position? So one is more historically looking, and the other one is forward looking.
Now, we spoke about the importance of Africa, and the conversation is about Africa. Now, bringing this concept of sustainability reporting closer to home, what does the current landscape in South Africa and across Africa look like, both from the public sector and the private sector?
So, if we start with South Africa, I think, we have to obviously acknowledge that South Africa has a long history of reporting. We obviously, being the pioneers of integrated reporting, have a history of strong governance, especially reporting. But then if you look across the continent, that hasn't always been well embedded. And we've got varying levels of readiness or adoption, right? The one thing about Africa is also to just always, I always try to to remind myself and others that Africa is definitely not homogenous. So what we're looking at is actually different kind of stories unfolding at different speeds. Yes, there's definitely a significant move towards adopting, especially the ISSB standards. I think those are the standards that have driven the momentum quite significantly. And so we are seeing, I mean, if you look at a lot of the East African countries, they've all made a firm commitment. Similarly, the likes of Nigeria, Ghana, we have firm commitments to ISSB standards. South Africa hasn't made that commitment to ISSB standards, but I do think that from a readiness level, we probably have greater experience, especially when you think about the processes that are around collecting this type of non-financial information, having systems in place. I'm not saying that we as South African companies, especially the listed entities, will have an easier journey than other countries, but certainly I believe that there is some level of preparedness. Whereas Ethiopia has recently released a roadmap to adopt ISSB standards, they have a slightly further route to go because they are still developing the accountancy profession in terms of having an accountancy body that is newly established. That means they may have a capacity challenge in terms of people who will be able to actually execute the reporting. My bias towards the accountancy profession, because I am a member of the accountancy profession, my job has been about encouraging the accountancy profession to recognize that they have a role to play in sustainability reporting. But that doesn't mean that I believe that only the accountancy profession should be a part of the sustainability reporting, by no means. But I will talk from that vantage point because that is what I know. I think that, when we start thinking about building institutions as well, because it's one thing to have a framework that you've adopted and to even have the people, but we also know that unfortunately humans are humans, and if there isn't some level of regulation, compliance, and monitoring, things start falling apart. So you also need to have those institutions that are going to support the adoption, which I don't necessarily think a lot of the countries may have that bedded down. There's the systems. Collecting this type of information is can be quite complex. If I think about, for example, if you're asking your supplier as a listed entity, you're saying to the supplier, I need to know what your emissions are for my reporting. So if it's a small entity, they may not be able to know they may not know what you're asking for, may not be able to give you that kind of information to make your reporting make sense. So there's also that level of readiness that is required. But to also touch on the public sector, again, if I look at South Africa, so I think people don't always associate the fact that in the public sector, we've been doing the annual performance reviews, right? That's been in place for several years. That is a form of non-financial reporting. Yes, it's not necessarily, linked to an international IFRS type of standard, but already we've got the practice of reporting on how we are performing in relation to our service delivery targets, for example. So again, there is something that's happening. Is it at a level where we are ready to be flying in our reporting journeys? Unlikely. But I think that there's also an opportunity for companies and governments to also just pause, reflect, because I think sometimes we'd fall into the trap of wanting to adopt for the sake of adopting without really thinking about what does it mean? What will it take for the people that have to actually execute and the companies that have to invest in this type of reporting? So and that's again where my global hat comes in, where I say, I absolutely agree, let's adopt. But let's also not be, don't let haste be the driver. Let's actually be measured about it so that what you do implement becomes effective. It actually adds value and it's not reporting for the sake of reporting, because then that doesn't really help anyone.
Now, sustainability reporting, once looked at from a face value perspective, is about compliance.
Mhm.
However, what are some of the economic, environmental, or societal realities that are driving the focus towards the sustainability reporting? And why should the different stakeholders, such as investors or businesses, and even the public sector, begin prioritizing this reporting within their governance agenda?
I think we've definitely seen, especially the environmental challenges, right? If I think, for example, the floods that we've experienced at KZN as an example, you know, if we had been applying the lens of sustainability reporting and thinking, what would happen to our businesses if there was a climate incident, we would have been probably better prepared. And the same goes, for example, for government, right? Had the municipalities that were affected by those floods already been thinking about climate risk, they may have been in a better position to not necessarily prevent, but to respond quicker, to respond more effectively. Um, I mean, I did lose track of where the status is, but at some point I remember reading that years later, people were still not rehoused after having experienced the devastating impacts of those floods. Toyota was a classic example of a company that suffered the impact of floods in that their production was significantly delayed, and they weren't able to then produce their cars because of that. I'm not saying they weren't thinking about the risks. I can't speak to the company itself, but what I'm saying is, those type of incidences really make it very clear that if you are thinking about your risks and the opportunities that come with it, then maybe you'd be a little bit more better prepared to respond. And so I think my encouragement is that we think about sustainability reporting as an insights an insights process, right? It helps you as a company really think beyond the now, really think beyond profits and think about what if.
Many sustainability reports contain significant information, yet still lack decision useful insight. And I think you've kind of touched on it. In your view, what makes sustainability or what makes a sustainability report truly fit for purpose?
You answered the question in your own statement, right? The question becomes, what information is it giving me? If this is telling me that, oh, this company is doing so well, I've taken so many kids to school, beautiful, brilliant. But what does it mean from a value perspective? I recently spoke and I was talking about how sustainability has moved us from values to value. Values as in it's the right thing to do, it's emotional. Um, but how does this ultimately impact my balance sheet in the long run? Because yes, I am absolutely all heart, but we appreciate that businesses are about creating value, whether it is for the shareholders, even of society, in fact, because there is value in having operational businesses. For me, it's the fact that at the end of the day, the people that either be it the investors especially are looking at this business and saying, oh, okay, if this is their risk, I can I can take this risk, I can live with this risk, and I will invest more. Then there is decision useful information that is coming out of that. I think that's ultimately the long and short of it. Sustainability reporting makes sense when it also helps us make informed decision. It doesn't mean that it has to be all positive. Yes, we haven't tested. I need to also just put that forward. We haven't tested what full ISSB reporting, for example, will mean if I disclose that actually it's going to take me 10 years to become green, right? That might have unintended consequences. That is a concern that I have quite often. But at the same time, that transparency also means that you as a business can say, it's going to take me 10 years. These are the actions that I'm going to do, that I'm going to undertake to get there. So now you are operating as a business with clearer goals, those metrics and targets that you spoke about. You have a clearer goal to this is how I need to get from here to there. Had you not undertaken the process to actually find out what your sustainability impact is, what if I talk about how much waste you're creating, how much water you're wasting, had you not undertaken that exercise, you wouldn't know, and therefore would not have a yardstick to measure yourself towards. So that, sustainability reporting provides insight. It gives you insight so that you know how to do better. I think that's the message that I think ultimately it gives us. Absolutely.
Now, sustainability reporting, if you're looking at it from a South African perspective, is relatively seen as voluntary in the current landscape. So, in your view, in your expertise views, is mandatory sustainability reporting inevitable for South Africa or across Africa? And if so, what should organizations be preparing now? What practical infrastructure or internal capabilities should organizations already be putting in place today?
Yeah. Look, touched on this a little bit earlier. We are definitely in the era of mandatory sustainability reporting. It is 100% inevitable for a lot of the countries, even South Africa. I mean, there is a working group that is currently looking at the journey towards sustainability reporting for South Africa. So we're going to have to see how that unfolds. But if you look at the countries in Africa that have adopted sustainability reporting, it is all mandatory. Yes, it's phased at the moment, and but if I think back, I'm guesstimating, so please don't hold me to that. But by 2028, a lot of the countries that have committed to ISSB reporting will have mandatory reporting in place. So that is definitely the trajectory. And like I said earlier, unfortunately, you know, because humans are humans, there is room for mandatory reporting, because then at least we should have ideally some standardization. And of course, where there's enforcement, then there is likely, compliance, unfortunately. So we are definitely in that era. What do companies need to be preparing for? I think upskilling people. For me, it's the people first, because those are the ones that are going to have to ultimately help you get to a point where you are reporting. And it's important that companies also remember that sustainability does not sit in one neat department or function, right? It is a cross-cutting. For it to be effectively adopted, it has to be filtered across different departments. It has to be understood as a way of doing business, a day-to-day attitude towards doing better, acting better, collecting information. So it's important to start having your people understand what their role is in facilitating successful sustainability reporting for the organization itself. The next thing, of course, becomes looking at, the important thing as well is the governance, right? The governance structures. It's all good and well to say we're going to start reporting on sustainability. It's good and well to have regulations that sustainability is mandatory. And then there isn't, a commitment from the top towards the sustainability. So is the board having a conversation already? I think those are the conversations that should be happening at a board level, to say, oh, okay, well, we're seeing this happening in this particular country, or we've seen that in our country now, we have a roadmap. As a board, what are we doing? Who is owning the sustainability reporting initiative? Who is going to be accountable to us for the sustainability reporting initiative? And how do we support this organization? So it's the people, it's the governance structures, definitely. And then, of course, it is starting to think about the systems that will facilitate the reporting. That one is a tricky one because it comes with cost implications. I suppose even the people, if you have to hire externally, it comes with cost. Hire, train, it all comes with money, unfortunately, but it's a long-term game. So, and then, like I said, companies don't operate in a vacuum, so they likely have a value chain. The value chain being the people that actually, especially the input into your business. If you're a manufacturing entity, do you have suppliers, your clients, if you're a bank? Start thinking about what information are we going to require. And especially for the big organizations, I think it is socially responsible for you to think about how you support your small and medium suppliers, especially because they will not necessarily have the expertise for this. So how do you help them get ready to support your own reporting?
So, what role should finance teams and operational leadership play in strengthening the credibility, the quality, and the decision usefulness of sustainability reporting?
Look, I think as finance professionals, we have experience in gathering data, right? So that is the one thing that already stands us out as members of the profession in terms of supporting sustainability reporting. We have experience with controls. Again, even within sustainability risks and reporting, you need to think about control processes. So for me, I think that the accountancy profession or the finance profession has a very, very key role. Of course, we've got experience with the reporting in itself, right? And these standards that have been developed are written in that same language. Materiality is still materiality, whether financial or sustainability. So we do have that understanding. We have the understanding of documentation, knowing that there has to be an audit trail because assurance becomes an important factor. Making sure that you have that documentation that will help your assurance providers believe that, oh, okay, these disclosures that have been reported are in fact appropriate. The application of judgment. Sustainability reporting is a huge exercise in application of judgment and estimates. Again, we are trained in that type of thinking. So that's really where I believe that we do have a major role to play when it comes to sustainability reporting.
You've touched on this around the governance element. So, what should boards and auditors and executives be paying close attention to when overseeing sustainability reporting as well as its underlying governance?
So I think this goes back to the conversation we had around the ownership, right? Firstly, as a board, you probably should be looking at your pack and saying, why are we not talking about sustainability if we're not, right? We need to be thinking about how are sustainability risks or opportunities impacting or informing the strategic decisions that we are making in this room, right? And again, I talked about the accountability and the governance. Who owns this? Do we as a board, when you look at each other, is there somebody in this room who has an understanding of sustainability? So for me, it's that making sure that we are asking the right question, our decisions are being informed in some way or another by consideration of what sustainability issues, how might sustainability issues impact our decision making right now? How are they informing the risks? I sit on audit committees, and risk management is a big part of ARC's conversations, right? Are we looking at the right risks? Are we thinking about how a potential sustainability issue, right, a climate incident, we recognize that sustainability issues may not impact organizations in the same way. The same issues may not necessarily impact the same all organizations, but are we thinking about that as a board? So yeah, it's really making sure that it is embedded in our practices. It's not just oh, when we're reviewing our integrated report, what have we said about sustainability, and then it's done.
In closing, sustainability reporting or sustainability and bringing that from, as we said, the integrated report or from the corner office of the sustainability manager into, as you are suggesting, into the way we think about the way we do business and operationally, requires a mindset shift. Because now we're talking about issues about the environment and society and also money. My mind that says that. So, what mindset and culture shift do African boards and governance professionals still need to make regarding sustainability reporting?
I think we focus a lot on complexity. Oh, it's going to require additional reporting. Oh, but we have so much other reports that we need to do. I think that's the first one, is just let's not focus on the complexity, but see this as business as usual. So as opposed to what should we report, let's think about it as what information do we need to understand for the goodness, for the betterment of our organization? Because when you start thinking about what do I need to understand, then it's embedded, right? It is part of our being. It is what we do on a day to day versus, oh my goodness, now we need to think about tick, 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 tick. Because then that creates anxiety, it creates burdensome, as opposed to this is business as usual. So for me, it really has to be moving away from this mindset of, oh, it's all just complex, it's all too much, to this is actually a way that we are functioning daily, and we are actually we're obtaining information to help us understand our own business and our own operations.
And then lastly, do you have any words or last words that you would like to say or encourage private sector, public sector, listed and unlisted entities in terms of their journeys around sustainability reporting going forward?
I think the important thing to remember is that it's not a race. Yes, there will be timelines. Yes, there will be deadlines, right? And maybe I'll extend that messaging beyond just the preparers, but also to the regulators. And to say, firstly, to the regulators that regulation should not be about enforcement alone or punishment for those that don't get it right. It must also be capacity building. It must be walking the journey, understanding that this is new for a lot of companies, especially those that don't have that initial experience, and therefore you need to walk the journey with them to support better reporting. For the companies as well, is that yes, it's a journey, so don't try and do everything all at once. There are phases, there are transition provisions. And a lot of the countries have gone with phased adoption, which means you have time to start building slowly. Start with the information that you can easily obtain and then start building out. But equally, that doesn't mean wait until the year before it becomes mandatory to start reporting. Do it now. For those that have the luxury of not having a roadmap yet, and I'm talking to the South African entities specifically, and any other country that hasn't hasn't mandated a reporting deadline, start thinking about it now. Why would you wait until it becomes mandatory to start thinking about it? If we start thinking about sustainability reporting, like I said just now, as kind of a way of doing good business or good business practice, then why wouldn't you embed it into your business already? Slowly.
That is brilliant advice. It takes out the overwhelm.
Yeah.
It brings context, and it actually allows organizations to go through the journey of realizing that it is not just administrative, but it's also strategic. There's economic benefit for
100%.
the business, and it's a mindset shift, not only for the business itself, but for the business and for its customers, its stakeholders, the society that it operates in, and most importantly, for future generations.
Just on that future generation point, right? I can't remember who said this, so these are not my words, but it really stuck with me that especially when we think about the stuff that we do see, the climate change, Mother Nature, the earth, is actually responding to how we have treated the environment. And we say that we're trying to save the earth. A lot of the languages, we're trying to save the planet. But actually, planet is responding, and the planet will do what the planet does. We don't know what that is. It is the human race that is going to that's not going to survive the impact of us not doing the right thing. So we're actually trying to save ourselves and our children versus save the earth for our children.
I love that perspective. I really do. And in my
I wish it
mind,
was mine, but it's stuck.
I love it. And I love that you brought it up because in my mind, it solidifies the importance of both materialities, this impact and financial materiality, so that one says, be cognizant of what you're doing to the environment, because it then comes back into how it treats the
100%.
business. It is literally a circle as to what we're now saying. Oh, let me worry about my financial materiality. Oh, well, it was part of the impact materiality that went out 60 years ago.
100%.
That is
100%.
now. So I think it just goes back to solidifying the importance of both materialities. But we'll leave that to the regulators. And otherwise, Lebo, thank you so, so much for your time, your perspectives, great insight. And I think that our viewers and our listeners will actually hear so much, especially as it relates to the value of this reporting. The fact that, yes, it is compliance, but also it is building a business that will thrive into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Namhla. It was a really, really good conversation. Thank you.
All right, cool. Thank you.